Recording. So the Microsoft remote desktop app that you can find in the Microsoft Store looks a little different than the legacy application that some of you are familiar with. And essentially, when you click on it, the GUI is pretty simple. What you're going to do is add a PC, and that'll give you a chance to put in the IP address. So if I reference the connection I was previously attempting to use, I can copy and paste this into here. And this port identity is going to be unique to everyone. Each person will have their own unique port identity, okay? And then for a user account, depending on the machine you're connecting to, if it's a local account, you'll need to include the name of the machine. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Here, can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay, so you notice the name Rigel? That's the name of the system. And I'm connecting to an account to access this. So essentially I can fire up your access. And there's a backslash, not a forward slash, but a backslash in between the user account name and the computer name. And we're going to talk about how a standalone security model means the accounts that are created for access on an operating system, when those are set up, if it's one machine, those accounts live on the same machine. So what are we saying? If you have 3 different machines in a network, you have 2 users, and you want each of those 2 users to be able to access all 3 machines, you have to create a machine for user 1 on the first, second, and third machine. Then an account for user 2 on the first, second, and third machine. Because the accounts for the different users will only exist on the one system. That's called a standalone security model. I am likely to revise or update the study guide just a little bit. I'm going to tweak the content of this so that there are some things that we're talking about now that will appear in here in the study guide and in the addendum. So I may add some information about types. So I can give this display name a connection nickname. I'll call this VM platform, right? And then if I click save, now I can basically edit the connection to do some other things with its settings. What I'm looking for has to do with screen and keyboard issues. A lot of times if you don't set these a certain way, you end up having issues when you connect. Here's a great example. On the traditional application, when you're using remote desktop, once you have the IP address and port that you're going to connect to, and you understand the name of the system and the user account you'll use, it's a good idea to click on display and then adjust this up or down based on, well, the kind of display that you have to work with. So you may have an older laptop or an older display where it's high definition. It's an HD display or TV, but it's the original standard of HD, which is only 720 lines of resolution. And then if you have the newer high definition TV, that's actually 1080. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about here? So what you'll do is you'll slide this up or down depending on what your screen resolution is. The other thing you can do to enhance your experience when you connect to your remote system is to adjust this color setting so that it's 15 or 16 bit. And I usually pick 15 because all I'm doing is working with tasks and some basic graphics. I'm not editing graphics. I'm not adding special effects to a TikTok video. I'm not doing any of that kind of stuff. So I don't need that. If it were set to the default true color and it were set to a very high setting, like full screen, if you don't have the real estate and the color demands are high, the basic effect is that your connection is going to be slow and it won't work as well. So you should reduce the resolution down one level below the size of your own display. So you're the one that can determine what the size of your own display is. So you can slide up or down. And in Windows 10 or in Windows 11, that's easy to do. If you go to the desktop and go to display settings, then it'll show you what your display is. So I want to set something that's a little lower than 1080 on the horizontal resolution and a little less than 1920 on the vertical resolution. So that's what I would want to set in here. So instead of maxing it all the way up where it's this, I'm going to come one level lower just because, you know, I want my remote view to fit inside my display. I don't want it to be so large that it covers over my taskbar. And then I can't get to my taskbar. And that can happen. I want to move this down to 15-bit instead of 24-bit. I don't need millions of colors, right? And so you can also change other settings for local resources. We're not going to get into that right now, but you should probably leave those alone and not go there. This is an excellent tab to reference. So depending on the speed of your internet, you may want to adjust up or down. If you have typical commodity internet, you know, the lowest cost package from the island internet service providers, you're going to want to pick low speed bandwidth. And what that'll do is it'll adjust some things here. So again, your experience is better. If you have a higher grade, like you have satellite or you have a decent internet service provider, you can choose high speed broadband. But you should probably do a test to see if you're actually getting 6, 8, 10 megabits per second, right? So those are the kinds of settings that you can adjust in the traditional application. And I'm confident that they're in here somewhere with the new application. We just got to fish them out, right? So see, start connection in full screen. If you turn that off, that the arrangement of the features are different in this new app, but there may be some new ones. I haven't had a chance to completely inspect it. It's built-in help or about, so we'll fish that out and we'll have more details for you early next week. So because our connection isn't really working, well, let's try the other one. I'm going to close this screen now that I've demonstrated those options to you. But if I go back to this and I go back to my main screen, I can simply double click on this and it's going to prompt me for a login. So I'll put in my information with a backslash. That's a 0, by the way. So sometimes I'll put in numbers instead of letters because it's harder for hackers to guess what my account is. And I'll also put in something in there for a user account name that isn't, you know, Professor Kentop, because every now and then I'll get a disgruntled student that wants to hack Professor Kentop's account. And if I have an account that's named Prof Kentop or, you know, anything like that, it's not good, right? So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to go ahead and try something here. And connect. Oh, and so this app is actually doing better than my traditional application. So it's going to ask you if you want to accept the certificate and connect. If you see this, you want to ask for the details. And if there's an option to install the certificate, then you want to use the certificate installation. Let me show you how this looks on the other one. So in the traditional, everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Someone hit connect. For some reason, I'm still not getting, I should have that screen by now. The certificate screen that you saw pop up in here, it'll ask you if you want to view it. Yeah, that's totally different response. Yeah, we're dealing with some network issues because of the failure before. So if I click, so now it's going to be difficult. Oh, so evidently it is connected. Let me disconnect and redo this again. Okay, I'm going to remove this altogether. When you get a chance to see the screen about the certificates, you want to copy the certificate to the local machine. I'll have a video of how to do that with step-by-step that'll walk through. And in the interest of time, I just want you to know that when you're doing that, see if I copy and paste this, I'll just call this yeah. So instead of connecting with the screen now, we're back offline again. That's frustrating. We'll work on that over the weekend. All you'll have to do is click the link, watch the YouTube, follow the steps. Oh, this was in the background. Okay. Let me try this again. Can someone unmute your mic and tell me you're still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, we're here.
Okay, so accept the certificate and connect. You're going to say, do you want to connect anyway? Usually when you click details, there are additional options that allow you to save. But if you don't see that, you still want to check this box and then click connect anyway. And all right, so here it's saying that the login didn't work. So we're still having some network difficulties of some type. For now, we'll we'll hit the pause button on that part of our assignment, and I will go in here and extend the deadline, so we'll push this back to Wednesday of next week. By the time we meet Monday, this will all be ironed out. Okay, so what I'd like to do though, part of our deployment, if you're going to deploy operating systems, if you're going to install them and configure them and set them up, one of the things that we want you to understand, other than what an operating system is and what it does and its main components, we want you to understand the varieties of operating systems you have to choose from. If you choose the wrong type of operating system, then that can create a whole series of problems. For example, I believe it was in this class, and it might have been Wednesday, but there are two broad types of operating systems: client operating systems like Windows 10 or Windows 11. And then there are server operating systems that are intended for larger machines that many users access for services and resources. So one thing to understand is when you would want to choose a client license as opposed to a server license. In the world of Linux, when you choose a client operating system and you download it off the internet, it typically includes a graphical user interface. There's a desktop and a taskbar or menus for people to navigate. When you choose a server operating system in Linux, because it's open source and maybe you want to host a website and you don't want to pay somebody lots of money, you don't want to pay Microsoft a lot of money to set up a website server. So you just want to try some things, and you download a version of Linux with something called LAMP. It's a distribution specific to an operating system that's intended to work as a host for websites, right? LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. All the tools you need to set up a website are built in and included in the operating system distribution. So anything that's LAMP or LAMP in the Linux world. Thing is, when you install it and start to set it up, shocker of shockers, you'll find that unless you specify or include a GUI, all you get is this. That's it. So when you start the server up, you better know what you need to do to get it running and get your website moving. You need to know the commands or terminal options within Linux. And that's one thing that's important to understand about server operating systems, is that in general, server operating systems tend to exclude a cute little graphics interface with stuff you can do with a mouse and keyboard, right? Any questions about the difference between client and server operating systems?
No, not for me.
So how many of you knew that there are free operating systems that are as good as Windows?
I definitely didn't know that. I mean, I guess except for Apple, I guess.
Yeah, I'm also pretty sure that when I make that remark, that folks from Microsoft would probably say, hey, remember, you're certified with us as a systems engineer. You shouldn't sell us out. But the truth is, there are commercial operating systems that you pay for. And true or false, you pay for the operating system when you buy a Mac, an Apple computer. Yes or no?
You said you can? I think you can.
Well, what I'm asking is, when you buy a Mac are you paying, is that a commercial operating system? Is that an operating system, the OS X system? Is that one that you pay for? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my guess would be that you are paying for that, right? Because you're paying for that Apple product, so you're paying for that OS system.
That is correct. So the Mac operating system is referred to as OS X, right? And the latest version for Macs, I think, is Ventura, yeah. And you get free upgrades to the operating system as long as you own the Mac. Now, Macs cost more. Macs cost more than other brands of laptops and PCs. And so there's a variety of different flavors for Mac. You have, you know, all the guts of a Mac built into the display. That's called an iMac. In case you're not familiar, you have miniature versions, right? You have full-blown workstations. These are fire-breathing dragons. These are $20,000 machines, $10,000 machines. Of course, everybody's familiar with a MacBook Pro and a MacBook Air. Those are very slick laptops. But the simple truth is, those tend to be more expensive than other comparable models of computers from other brands that are running Windows or running Linux. And the simple truth is, they include the cost of the operating system with the purchase of the hardware. So, and it's a little higher in cost, but then they give you updates free. They give you free versions of the operating system at no charge, as long as you own that hardware.
But is the Mac OS less intuitive than, say, like Windows? Because I mean, since Windows, I wouldn't say, I guess it's universal, but it's on most computers, right? Is that the reason? Is that like kind of like the reason why they're charging so much for their OS? Because
I'm very glad you asked that question. And thank you for asking that question. So when we talk about operating systems, you can kind of divide the universe for operating systems, instead of splitting them into two halves of a universe: client operating systems for devices and PCs and laptops, or server operating systems. Another way to divide the operating system universe is when you look at market interests. And Macs are designed by efficiency engineers. So there is such a thing. And one of the things that Apple prides itself on is how easy it is to use their technology, right? It's easy to understand for the average person who isn't technically, right? They don't want to know how the technology works in order to be able to use it. And so they spend an awful lot of time and labor and love in designing the features so that it takes very much less work to get at them. And what we mean by that is the graphical design. There are some versions of Linux that kind of mimic or try to copy some of this, and that's kind of interesting. And I've heard others say, and then when I first converted to Windows 11, I thought, you know, this reminds me of a Mac. I've worked with Macs, I've used Macs, but when I look at Macs here, and then I look at the taskbar behavior, right? So I'm going to put this on the center instead. Well, as soon as I do that, this kind of reminds me of a Mac, because that's what we call the dock on a Mac, right? So where am I going with this? People pay more for a Mac because they just want it to work. When they buy a new printer, for example, they turn it on, they connect it to the Wi-Fi network, they turn on their Mac, and their Mac automatically knows, okay, here's the printer, and automatically connects to it. So you don't, you don't have to go through 6 different steps and 5 different menus, and you don't have to go through a whole bunch of hoops to hook up a printer. So in general, now the argument is there are trade-offs, right? So if you're making things very accessible for convenience, it means that you're designing an operating system where maybe efficiency isn't the primary interest. This is where Linux really shines, okay? And I want to say this, you can download different flavors of Linux. They're called distributions, and these are open source licensed operating systems, client level or server level. And I gave you the example of LAMP, right? So when you download CentOS, for example, and you want to use like a Red Hat platform, some of you may or may not know, Red Hat Linux is the gold standard for Linux when it's run in government agencies. So Linux is open source. Most governments won't run open source because, hey, the general public, they crowdsource the development of this thing. This is like a global effort to provide an operating system to people who don't have the money to buy Windows or can't afford a Mac. And so Red Hat developed a serious version of Linux, and they said, you know, this is ideal for governments because they can reduce their cost, they can serve, they can provide data and systems to the people they serve more efficiently, but let's provide the support and let's provide the drivers for the hardware. So when you install Red Hat, it's called Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's an acronym. And it's one of the few that governments authorize for installation on their computer systems. RHEL is the acronym, RHEL. The thing to understand about this is that it's when you have to pay to use it, but you're not buying the operating system. You're buying the support that comes with the operating system, and unless you buy the support, it doesn't run. Now, Red Hat has a heart for the little guy. So they produce and they offer their old versions of Red Hat, and it's called CentOS. So Red Hat, that's the commercial version. You have to pay for it. It's for systems, it's for server, so it's a server operating system. But they take old versions of Red Hat and they release them to the public and they say, okay, you can use our Linux without support, you just install CentOS. And if you say, I want to download CentOS because it's like really well made and by the time there's an old version out, it's been supported, a lot of bugs have been out. So this is a really good way to host a website. And if you do LAMP and you want to, let's see if there's a distribution. You might find that there's a distribution that's ready-made that already has Apache, MySQL, and PHP already included. And when you power it on and you hit it with a web browser, you get a splash page for a website, right? So yeah, so all right, so now there are a few extra steps that you go through to install LAMP on CentOS. There's a free version of Red Hat that they distribute. It's the beta version. Does anybody know what a beta is? Has anyone ever heard the term beta?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want the latest, greatest Red Hat and you like living on the bleeding edge, you download a copy of Fedora. And here's something you should know. Only download the even the even numbered releases. So see how it says Fedora 37 here? Boo, don't download that. Wait until it's 38 or go back to 36 and download 36. Fedora, and I misspelled that. Fedora. So Fedora is the beta version of Red Hat. It's free, but they're giving you a preview of what their next Red Hat is going to look like, and they want people to help them test it. So they release it free, and if you want, you know, latest, greatest features, and you want the best support for your newest hardware, or you have a graphics card and you want to run gaming in Linux, right? Then you'd want Fedora because that's available. The point I'm trying to make is the interest in Linux is to specialize so that you get the best performance. You can take a very old machine, a 10-year-old PC, and it will support a dozen websites. Let me say that again. You can take an old PC, put Linux on it, and if you're getting the proper distribution of Linux, you can support a dozen websites on a 10-year-old PC. And most people are ready to take it to the dumpster. Why is that? Because the commercial interest or market interest for Linux is all about efficiency. If you want an operating system that's more bulletproof, that isn't easy to hack, you want Linux. Well, what about extensibility? What does that mean? Has anyone ever heard the term one size fits all?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you buy Microsoft Server, you're allowed to configure something called a role. So you can tell Microsoft Server when you're starting to set it up, oh, I want you to handle DNS. Oh, I want you to be the web server. Oh, I want you to carry the database or the email system. I want you to help me set up an entire enterprise domain so I can conveniently and centrally manage all of the users, all of the groups, all the security settings, everything from a single screen. That's called Active Directory. They created a one size fits all. When you buy Microsoft Server, all you have to do is click different buttons and you can use it for anything. You can actually set up routing services. So you can turn a Microsoft Server into a router. Now, I wouldn't advise that because network routers are purpose designed and the operating system is Linux. And something that is designed and sold or marketed as a router is going to be very, very efficient at routing network traffic. And if you take the average Microsoft server on a standard server chassis, general purpose, and you load Windows on it and you set up routing, oh, it'll work, but not like the purpose-driven design will. So Microsoft wanted to conquer the universe. They wanted everybody to buy Microsoft, whether they're using clients for users and portable devices, or even phones. There's a version of Windows for phones, and it isn't doing so well lately. I think they retired it. But in any case, Microsoft wants you to buy server license and client license. They just want Windows everywhere. So they put all the hooks and the kitchen sink in there. Now, what that means is that that's a hell of a target for a hacker. And one of the things you need to understand in terms of trade-off, if convenience is your thing, then it's going to be easy to use, but you can't pack too many features into a Mac before it gets to be confusing for the users. So Mac users don't tend to operate software that looks like the cockpit of an airliner. And so convenience is the thing, and that means that there are other trade-offs. So in order to add XYZ extra features on a Mac, now a lot of Mac users would argue with you and say, well, that's not true. I use my Mac and it does great video. It's a great tool for media. Mac systems are ideal for work with media because they're convenient and they're powerful. They tend to attract a lot of attention from design and artistic disciplines, right? So if you're doing anything with media, you're doing anything with publication, you're doing anything with graphics, but a lot of the way they structure those features and resources, it's easy to use. So people can focus on the media, they can focus on the content instead of focusing on how do I get my stupid system to work? I don't know if that makes sense. If you want to be secure and you want to have the best security, you're going to want Linux, and you're going to want to use a distribution of Linux that is intended for high security environments. If you want an operating system that's versatile, where you learn how to use it and then you can do anything with it. It means your learning curve is reduced because you're learning one platform, and then once you're done, well, then you can do anything with it. So extensibility is Microsoft's vision for how to conquer the universe. It's important to understand these leading market interests, because when you're choosing an operating system, if you choose wrong, then you could make a lot of extra work for yourself, and that makes supporting it and troubleshooting it and maintaining it over the long term very, very difficult. Okay. Now, has anyone ever heard of the 80-20 rule?
No.
Okay. Well, when an operating system is designed, and the intent of this course is not to spend a lot of time on operating system design or internals, but we want you to know something about it. There is this concept called the 80-20 rule. And what it means is that 80% of the time, you're using only 20% of the features. Let me say that again. 80% of the time, the average human being is only using 20% of the resources or features. Now, that's true for everything in life, not just computing. So think about your toolbox. Most of you have a toolbox in the home, right? Or a toolbox in your car. Or you know someone with a toolbox. And the truth is, when you look at what's in the toolbox, 20% of the tools are used most of the time. There's a few tools that you use a lot. And when you look at how people organize their desks, they intuitively put the things they use more often closer to them, right? So one thing you want to understand about operating systems is that depending on the interest, that's how the operating system is designed. What do I mean? In Macs, they want to make it easy. So they take those 20% of the features and functions, and that's the most elegant and accessible part of their user interface, which is why most people just get on a Mac and do what they want to do, and they don't think about how to use it. It just works, right? When it comes to Windows, the idea is, well, we want features, features, features. We want to put as many features in there so that all they have to do is turn them on. And that kind of warps this whole idea of 80-20. And then Linux, Linux does pretty much what the Macs do. I just want you to understand this section in particular. This is the part I want you to memorize specifically. If you don't understand this in a common sense manner. When you finish this course and somebody needs help with an operating system, if you pick the wrong not everything is Windows, okay? So by the time we finish this course, you will have some experience with all of these. We have some Macs you can remotely log into to try some things. And we have some Linux systems that are good for hacking. Their specialty, right? They're very efficient at what they do. So we have some Kali systems that we'll set up so you can experience how those works. I do want you to get a sense for where the three pieces of the operating system universe are in terms of market. Because you're going to support an operating system somewhere on a computer, and you don't want to pick the wrong one. Here's a question for you. What do I put on a Samsung smartphone? What's the operating system I put on there?
Android.
Android. Android is a type of Linux. Why would I do that? Well, a Samsung smartphone has a very specific set of features. So the Android operating system is finely tuned to be highly efficient. And that's why you get so much play with a Samsung smartphone. I'm not knocking any other brands. I just wanted to use that as an example. Okay. So depending on what you're doing, if you're creating a solution or you're supporting technology resources for the general public, and everything has to be general purpose, and there's a wide range of needs, you're going to want to select Microsoft Windows client and server operating systems for use. And that's because 90% of all laptops, PCs, workstations, and server installations worldwide are Windows. So their strategy worked. And why is that significant? Well, in simple terms, you don't want to have to keep reinventing the wheel if it's a commercial interest. And if everybody knows how to use and work with Windows, that's half the battle. You may be involved in pursuits that don't have to do with the workplace, right? I'm going to go ahead and on Monday, we'll examine some differences between different Microsoft operating system versions and editions. There are some really striking differences. And most people don't know there's like a mini-me version of Windows Server. There is a mini-me. Has anyone ever seen Austin Powers?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So mini-me, he has a miniature version of himself. Dr. Evil has a miniature version of himself. He calls mini-me. Well, anyway, there's a miniature version of Windows Server, and it works very good on small things. So we'll talk about that on Monday. And by Monday, I'll have the resources on tap so we can walk through the solution steps. Okay. And are there any questions before we close our session today?
Should we have downloaded the data center and the standard Windows 2020 server? Because I just took down, the key and the name, but I didn't download.
That's a great question. The short answer is yes, but download only one or the other, because the same install media is used for data center as is used for the standard edition.
Yeah, okay. So I was wondering about that. So the data center.
Yeah, that's why we're going to get into that on Monday. That Microsoft, remember, they want to be all things to all people, right?
Yeah.
So if you download the install media for one edition of server, it includes the code and the media for the industrial strength edition, the data center version. So you only download one copy, and when you're installing, if you put the standard key in, you have a standard install. If you put the data center key in, you have a data center install.
Okay.
And we're going to ask.
So
Go ahead.
Would you just recommend using the data center version? Because in the book, it literally says that the data center version and the standard version have the same features, except that the data center obviously has more features.
Well, the
So-
data center version is intended for very large machines.
Yeah,
So if you don't have a very large machine,
then the standard. Okay, I
it
see.
may
I
not,
get it.
it may not work as well or as smoothly, but what we're going to do is use the data center version in the virtual machine platform, and then we'll ask you to use the standard edition on your own laptop.
Ah, oh, you know, I see. I see.
Yeah,
So okay.
yeah, it's because it's like a lighter version and it'll play nicer on limited hardware.
Okay.
Yeah, most people don't have the money to run a full-scale server in their home. So in order for this to end well, that's coming in the later modules, but you'll see how, and both of those installs you'll be able to noodle with them and see where those best work before the end of the semester. But the trick is to get the activation keys, and to answer your question, you just download the media once and you have it for both editions. And you can, yes, you should. It's a very large file. It's like 6 gigs. And or last time there was one time it was 6 gigs large, and then by gigs I mean gigabytes, not gigabits. So it takes a long time to download depending on your internet service provider. It's very good to have handy though. We'll be using it a lot, so. We'll talk more about that on Monday. Good question. Any other questions before we clear? Okay, I'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend.